I've been trying to talk about this game more than 2 years at this point. The reason why I couldn't is mostly because how I talk about games. I mostly compare games. Comparison is the easy form of talking about something. It's convenient, fast to do, not to mention it resonates with people. But when the subject matter is a peerless experience, you can't compare it. Approaching the game on its own merits is way harder to do, and it usually involves word salad, which I hate doing, but I don't see any other option when the subject matter is Deep Rock Galactic. DRG obviously has some similarities to other games, many things related to art do, but DRG is less imitative and more transformative. There are just a metric crap ton of things to talk about this game, but I will still try to condense my thoughts into something that isn't pretentious as shit. I will also be talking about the issues this game has. Unlike hundreds of 15-minute videos would lead you to believe, this game does have some issues. None of them are too damaging, and I believe this is a game everyone should try. I have more than 1,000 hours in this game, and I find myself keep returning to it again and again. I don't regret my time with it, and you won't either. Brief summary. You are a space dwarf who works for a soulless corporation called Deep Rock Galactic. Your job is to mine stuff or whatever the management tells you to do. Complete your objective in a procedurally generated cave network with up to 4 players while Hox's ecosystem tries to turn you into paste. 4 classes, each with unique equipment that are fully customizable. On top of that, you have modding support to make your game unplayable if you want to. There is also no DLC that locks gameplay options or elements to a paywall. There is no online-only requirement. The game basically has no strings attached, which is rare for today's market. I don't want to repeat the same thing everyone said in their videos already, and I'm gonna assume you have some familiarity with the game. So this is the part where the video is gonna take a turn. For the worst. First thing I wanna do is to play devil's advocate and talk about some of the common criticisms the game gets to see if they hold any bearing. The first criticism the game gets is that it doesn't have enough content. This is false, the game is procedurally generated. The second one I heard is that the game doesn't have enough weapons. This is also false. Sure, just 24 guns sounds like a small arsenal, but each gun has multiple overclocks that heavily alters the characteristics of them and the way you have to use them. When you account for that, it doesn't look like just 24 weapons for 4 classes. Another one is that the game is slow paced. This is somewhat true, but there is more to that. Not only there are difficulty modifiers in game to shape your preferred challenge, you can also mod your game to turn it into this, like Carrot basically recreating Pay-2's pace in this game. The game had major issues that the dev team took years to address. This is true. One of the most well-known examples are the equipment switching delay on clients, which lasted a year, and armor break modifications being janky as hell for 6 years. These issues got fixed while I was writing this, but this is the sort of stuff that breeds resentment from veterans of the game. Trust me, I would know that. There are balance issues the devs don't address. True. A select few pieces of equipment are broken beyond belief to the point that there are custom difficulties around them. However, most stuff is perfectly adequate in Vanilla Hazard 5 Plus, so I can't complain about it too much. Official modding support sucks. True, but there's an alternative way to mod the game for offline play and Linux. It's just not as convenient as official modding support, sadly. Now that's out of the way, I'm gonna start talking about the gameplay, starting with combat. In DRG, combat has 3 pillars. Your team's combined equipment, the variety of the enemy spawns in any given encounter, and the terrain. Combination of these 3 pillars decides how the fight will flow. Change any of these variables and the decisions you have to make will change. Let me run you through an example. You're entering a brand new cave with your team with these loadouts. Your team doesn't have a good angle on the spitballer, so you decide to retreat to the tunnel you entered the cave from to funnel glyphids and Macteras that spawned. Scout freezes the Macteras with cryo grenade and starts shooting the acid spitters before they can deal any significant damage. Driller and Gunner starts pressuring the front of the tunnel, Driller freezes them and Gunner shoots them. Angie throws down a lure to ease the pressure on the front line, and platforms the ceilings of the tunnel to force bugs to the ground. A menace spawns and Scout decides to use another cryonade to stop it from disrupting the team's hold. Praetorian and Oppressor comes around and Driller freezes them both while Angie shoots them with Hyperprop to deal massive damage. Once the tide has calmed down, the gunner throws a shield to the entrance of the cave to snipe the speedballers and cave legions. Your team survived the encounter. Congratulations. Now keep everything the same, but change the equipment. The situation is now completely different. Gunner just snipes the speedballer with a well-thrown incendiary nade and volatile bullets bulldog. Now the fight takes place in a much more open environment. Scott takes off to do some kiting and nitro collecting. Gunner and NG mows down the horde with their stun and range, and Driller keeps an eye off the blind spots in this cliff creates. Now keep the equipment the same, but change the environment. This is uneven terrain with holes and unusual terrain everywhere. Driller and NG terraforms the area to simplify the fight. Scott can't move around as easily, so he supports the Driller with single target DPS for air units and Praetorians, and Gunner uses way more shields to keep the team safe. Okay, now change the environment again and add a breeder on top of this. Scout could freeze the breeder, but what if the ceiling is high and Scout can't reach it? I hope I'm getting my point across. If I were to describe the DRG's combat with one word, it would be dynamic. Getting an understanding on what to do is just a gateway to mastery over it. On top of this, every enemy is weak or resistant to certain types of damage, and some ignore some status effects, others get crippled by them. The game just hands you a billion different tools and encourages you to break it in any way you can to get through situations cleanly. That amount of control is not only unique, not only confident, it is also insanely charismatic. Distraction and disruption types of tools exist in other games, sure, but other games require you to suspend your disbelief in order for such abilities to work. In DRG, you fight bugs. Bugs are stupid. Of course bugs would get confused from repellents, pheromones, one-check traps and other stuff. They just want a good meal, so serve them some lead. The enemies, terrain and the player's sandbox contributes to some insane levels of mechanical depth potential. Only a few PvE co-ops titles match. I think every modded player would agree with this statement, and I don't think it's a controversial take. Even seemingly basic things can have utility, such as incendiary grenade. Sure, it lights stuff on fire, but it also creates ground fires, which bugs avoid. So you can use one or two incendiary nades to create a makeshift temporary choke point if the situation arises. Whether or not this utility is useful is debatable compared to lead bursters, which is by far the best thing Gunner can equip at all times, but that's a balance issue, not really a design issue or fault of the mechanics. Change the numbers on the lead bursters and the grenade balance for Gunner would be in a much healthier spot. On top of this, you have movement and combat tags that the players can perform, or Gunner can just throw a lead burster. Look, I really feel the need to address the elephant in the room. The game has gaping balance issues. Some of the footage on the screen was from modded difficulties, and you may start to see some patterns emerging. I'm using particular weapons with particular abilities. Modded difficulties often rely on certain broken weapons and OCs, and yeah, I hear you. Just because you can finish 7x2 Diablo with non-meta things doesn't mean I can, and I have the microphone, so shut the fuck up. Even if you don't agree with that statement, you can't ignore a modded, super hard challenge type of DLD getting nullified by faking things that are OP. I don't mean, oh, just pick this and this to make mission more manageable. I mean, I did what you said, and there is now no challenge present in this challenge at modded difficulty. Why in the ever-loving God does Coilgun have heat trails that set bugs on fire and 250% fear on an infinite range and a huge radius? Why does Mine Layer, the AoE option for Hurricane, have higher single target damage than the base gun on top of AoE damage like no other? Why does Breach Cutter have more damage, more ammo, and more AoE potential than the dedicated AoE weapon? Why does TCF do the equivalent damage of half a nuke? Oh, by the way, nothing is resistant to the damage TCF does, unlike nukes. Why do lead bursters take out half the planet in a single volley? You simply cannot ignore some of the huge balance issues this game has after a certain point. It's not like they don't do balance changes, but their attempts are confusing because they rarely address what might be wrong with the gun. For example, PGL got buffed a while back, which was warranted, but it didn't really solve the issues the gun faces. PGL did low damage and struggled against low-level trash. It's supposed to kill like grunts and slashers. Slashers have explosive weakness, by the way, but the base gun can't kill him with a one clean shot 80% of the time. The explosion loses damage at the edges. When I say edges, I mean after 2 meters, regardless of what AoE size you have. Taking extra damage robs you out of the ammo upgrades, which the gun also needs to do something as basic as killing a pack of grunts reliably. It had no damage and no sustain compared to the competition, which not only does it better in AoE, but also single target damage. So they buffed it and the gun has the exact same issues. It is simply not a good craft DPS weapon, which is its job. Other two NG secondaries, even NG primaries, deal with crafts better on top of their single target potential. I love using PGL, don't get me wrong, it has 2 truly good builds that you can use, but the base gun is just a joke. It needs base damage increase, base ammo increase like twice the ammo, and decrease the falloff in order for it to even remotely compare with Breach Cutter alone. Breach Cutter needs to lose either its beam width or total ammo needs to be cut, I don't care which one. Shadows should lose the slowdown effect they apply, Stubby should be more accurate at base. Subata needs to double the damage with half the ammo. TCF needs its damage cut by half, even though it would still be super good for most things. Flamethrower mods such as Fear should work better, autocannon needs a base stun chance and tier 2 rate of fire build up the increase in the base gun itself, and Mind Layer shouldn't be an end-all be-all solution. Coil gun should lose 150% fear from this one mod to flat 100, and Hellfire can still lose some AoE size. M1K should lose some damage in favor of weak point damage multiplier like it used to have, cause right now, the gun can kill everything including grunts with no aim, better than any other scout primary, even its AoE options sometimes. Even if devs end up listening to me and do all of this, it would still scratch the surface of what it needs to be done to get the balance in a healthy state. But devs won't really do as I say, cause who the fuck am I really? I'm just a nerd on the internet. I understand the buffs they make are meant to keep the gun's original feeling, but when the guns fail to live up to their intended base roles or overstep their niche, it creates a game environment where you have to nerf yourself at times to get through problems in an engaging way. Speaking of gun feel, DRG is second to none. Every single weapon in this game is crafted with lots of love. Every single gun has unique mechanics, quirks, designs, sounds, which is just adorable. I don't mean this in a sarcastic way, it really is adorable. Literally every gun has quirks in some ways, so you bet there are some techs related to guns, either in movement or otherwise, to boost your effectiveness. Reload cancelling, jump shooting, passive reloads, combos, synergies. Gunplay on a visual level is something I will get to later, and I don't want to talk about the random tech in this video. There are just too many of them, and this isn't a tutorial. I have rewritten this video 8 times by now, and I'm really trying not to bloat it. The combat has depth, as I described, but that isn't end of the gameplay. The game has random cave generation, and it can generate basic rooms to death pits of despair, so the basic act of traveling itself is a challenge on its own. The way the generation works is this. The game will check the complexity and the length of the randomly generated mission and piece that information with handmade rooms to generate a staggering amount of potential variation every 30 minutes. If the cave complexity is high, rooms may generate on top of each other or vertically, greatly adding extra challenge to any given mission. The blend of handmade designer caves and random generation gives the game its main strength when it comes to gameplay. Rooms will never be unplayable random garbage, but they will never be quite the same, so they would get boring. On top of that, every single major update added more rooms to the generation, on top of mission types requiring their own styles of generation. This keeps the maps you play fresh on the long run. So semi-random maps with mostly open-ended objectives on most mission types gives the game an open-endedness that can be approached differently based on players. Combine everything with the biomes and their hazards and the mutators that refresh every 30 minutes, you got yourself a killer formula that can generate infinite content. The missions are generally open-ended, well, most of them are, which means as you get better, Your improvisation to approaches to situations get better. Yes, maybe all the red sugar spawned on the ceiling, but that's not gonna stop you now, is it? Cave Generation is infinitely versatile. This is in tandem with the incredibly versatile player arsenal and tools making love with terrain and enemy spawning make this game a peerless experience. There is simply not a single game that is quite like DRG. Sure, things can get janky at times, but considering video games are literally shooting a rock with electricity until funny pixels move on the screen, I can forgive the jank. Most of the DRG's core elements work 99% of the time, which is a hell of an achievement for designers and programmers alike. If it didn't, problems would be more obvious than naked eye, and this video's tone would be even more all over the place while I desperately try to explain the core design issues in a way that doesn't bore me or the audience. This is the video's art section, which I'm not really qualified to talk about, with a few things that touches the gameplay part of it, since most things about DRG are intertwined well. But yeah, it's art time. I'm gonna get the music out of the way first and foremost. The music in DRG is passable. It fits what's shown on screen, but it's not something I would care to listen on my own. And there is not enough music in this game compared to the time you can spend playing it. I highly recommend Kino's OST expansion mod if the in-game music starts to get repetitive. There are a few types of music tracks: ambient, Swarm, boss, event, and escape. All types play at certain game states, and they're fine, albeit you may not be able to recall which music is which. It's mostly synth and techno with few outliers here and there. Overall art style is on the simple side. It's a low poly industrial tech world where you can count the polygons on pretty much everything. However, all of this is accompanied by stellar lighting, particle effects, and some weirdly high polygon weapon models. Some things are on the lower end of polygons, some things are at the higher end, but not one asset clashes with the overall art style, which is something that is hard to achieve. I'm not a visual artist, so I don't want to talk about the visual side of things too much, since I'm out of my element here. All I know is that what I'm seeing on screen looks cohesive. For me, the highlights when it comes to art in this game is weaponry and the sound design of pretty much everything. Sound design in this game is super good. Every single enemy has distinct sounds, the environment makes sounds, the guns and the distinct firing, hit marker and death sounds depending on the cause of death, jingles and bits of sounds on menus, all of which is just so perfect. Sure, there are some stock sounds here and there, but I recognize those after hundreds of hours, and it's not like using stock sounds in a game is a crime. Some of the best games you can buy on Steam at the moment also uses stock sounds. The overall quality is something that needs to be witnessed in order to fit into something I will get into later. Weapon aesthetics are just super good. Every weapon has its own sounds, obviously, but the way they are visually designed and animated is also something to behold. Nearly every single weapon looks unwieldy and dysfunctional. Stubby has this electric injector thingy near the end of the barrel and it literally sparks. Those sparks not only create a particle effect, but also make sounds. It fully sells the idea that this is something that is homebrewed. GK2 has the ejection port on its left side, which means hot breath just gets flings into your dwarf's beard and it overall looks cheap, which makes sense since in the game's lore, GK2 is a mass-produced and a cheap rifle. Same goes for the drag, which literally has a fan to stop the plastic from melting. Only in DRG, a particle accelerator can be made out of plastic and deemed good enough to use. PGL shoots 40mm grenades, but when you size it up to your dwarf, it looks huge. That's not because the gun is oversized, it's because something that shoots 40mm would look big at the hands of a dwarf. Same goes in for M1K, it looks huge compared to the competition, but that's because the design is practically unchanged, so it's just a full-size M1 Garand in the hands of a dwarf. You may have realized that the most guns have a label underneath and the equipment station, and most of those labels are just heavy weapon. That's because most guns leave physical dents on the environment, not decals. Decals also exist for lower power guns, but actual physical holes that can be interacted with and even used for mining. Nearly every weapon is quirky yet somewhat plausible to function in the game's setting artistically, not to mention mechanically. On top of their design and animations, overclocks can change their sound and particle effects, making the overall feel of the weapons a complete and utter joy. The darkness gets blown away by the flare you throw. You hear sounds all around you. Something is approaching. You survive the encounter, and when you deposit what you mined, your dwarf makes a quip about something about his job. The quips range from what they will eat when they return to the equipment they use to pebble in his shoe. The game does have horror vibes when you are playing alone, but your dwarf doesn't seem to care. This is a routine work. I don't know if you worked 9 to 5 job before, but this is how it feels sometimes. For dwarves, this is just a 9 to 5 despite you having fun, and that's relatable. But the game's overall horror vibe starts to melt away the moment you get teammates. Now you have teammates, everyone is saluting, the darkness is not as prevalent as it once was, and the whole vibe changes from horror to violent workplace festival. This vibe is prevalent in labor class works like restaurants, construction sites, etc. The downtime from combat gives you time to soak in the atmosphere while solo, and chatting while in a team. This silly dwarf game can pull off a vibe closer to a workplace, regardless if you are solo or in a team, which makes things relatable for me, but I can't speak for everyone. The fact that the game can pull both horror and violent workplace festival vibes simultaneously is just a testament of its charisma and art. This is not something most people would talk about, but DRG is one of the most accessible co-op PvE shooter on the market for new players. Most co-op games are relatively hard to get into. Payday 2 Heist is a skill leveling system that it doesn't explain at all. Payday 2 has, and this is a conservative estimate, 100,000 mechanics it doesn't explain. Payday 3 is over-designed from the get-go, and its skill system is somehow even more confusing than most titles combined. Left 4 Dead games rely solely on its map design to guide players, cause Valve moment. Vermintide 2 has the world's most obscure difficulty scaling system, which makes the game unplayable if you just join your mates. Killing Floor titles have cancer leveling systems, and they also doesn't explain what the mechanics really are, and it's quite boring. I don't know how 3 is gonna go, but whatever. In DRG, the moment you open the game, you get a tutorial that sells the basics, and everything is introduced gradually. Levels unlock new weapon mods, and promotion gives you access to the most annoying part of the progression, and most of it is introduced one at a time, and you can take the information at your own pace. Least explained thing in the game is probably the bare bones skill system, but even that gets pop-up whenever you can claim points for it. All of this makes onboarding experience for new players more palatable than most co-op games. On top of that, there is the Miner's Manual, which you can read at any time to learn info about biomes, damage types, creatures, strengths and weaknesses, etc. New player experience is quite good with this game, and one of the best when it comes to PvE FPS co-op games. While the experience tapers off when the overclock grind is introduced, it takes 5 to 20 hours to get to the point where actual annoyance with progression starts. Space Rick 17 is one of the best hub worlds that exist in these games. Social spaces and actual gameplay things that are close to each other, and it doesn't take a year and a half to get to the actual gameplay. The Abyss Bar, Lloyd, Jaddy Boot Cabinet, Jukebox, and the fucking Barrel Hoop right next to each other, and everything else related to gameplay is clumped next to that. Whether you are selecting a mission, making builds, or changing cosmetics, it is never annoyingly far away. The space rig itself is beautifully detailed and has tons of side things to do. The game would have been fine if all of this was just a menu, but it would detract from the overall presentation and charisma of the game. And no, I did not forget about the endgame progression problem. The endgame of DRG is about collecting overclocks, which comes as both weapon modifications and cosmetics. There are a lot of these, and they are given at random, and you only get them via weeklies and promotions. For PvE power players who prefer to have a full arsenal to test their and the game's limits, this overclock grind sucks. I understand time gating is a really effective way for designers to both stretch the game's content and make sure players don't get to play the competition and don't burn themselves out or hate the life as a whole of getting life-altering health problems, but there must be a better way to get more of these. The grind was palatable when we had 16 weapons, but now we are way past at this point. There is always an option just to make weapon overclocks easier to access by shops or extra challenges. Anything but its current state is welcome, to be honest. Maybe we can use error cubes to buy overclocks from the shop. Error cubes are rare and random, but every time people find one, that will mean they will get an extra toy in their arsenal and that they can use. Sounds fair to me. Just getting these faster would mean a better new player experience. And as well as cause new players keep seeing all the weird shit greybeards do and wonder what they're missing. While I talk about onboarding experience and how good it is, late game issues don't end with overclock grind. This game can be weirdly obscure at telling players the specifics of its mechanics, especially when it comes to weapons. You know the section where the game tells you about damage types? Yeah, that's 1/3 of the damage types in the game. Why does minigun and Zuko spend 2 ammo yet fire 1 bullet? You're not meant to know that, sorry. This overclock gives extra damage to enemies afflicted by status effects. How much extra damage? Fuck you, we're not telling you something as simple as that. Some obscurity can be a good thing. It allows people that are invested in the game to make guides and form a sense of community over time. But here comes the second problem. You cannot find proper technical info about anything in this game that easily. There is like one YouTube channel that does it, and Technical DRG Wiki is emptier than my balls after Saturday night, so the only way you can get any info is to go to the Technical DRG Discord server and ask people about whatever bothers you, which isn't really ideal for people that are asking empirical questions like, how does flamethrower fear modification work? Chances are you will learn that this modification is good as useless before you end up learning why that's the case. I didn't learn how enemy AI works in Payday 2 because it was engaging. I learned it because the information is easily accessible. I didn't make a video on player damage mechanics in Payday 2 because no one knew about them. I made them because I wanted a single video that talks about all of those mechanics combined instead of few different ones and written guides. I simply don't feel comfortable making an actual guide in DRG because I simply cannot double check my in-game findings to validate my claims by using a written guide or something. Anything related to mechanics I can talk about has to be validated by me using mods, and that ended up burning me out of an entire class. Around 2 years ago I wanted to make a complete SCOT guide of all weapons, mechanics, movement and numbers. I worked on it for 8 months and completely gave up on it because everything I have to present had to be checked by launching sandbox utilities over and over and over again. I'm not tech savvy enough to decompile a game to check the values, and the times I spend mods just to validate things make things so slow, it was just better to give up on it than to spend more time on it. The information ecosystem of this game simply doesn't exist. That's why there are hundreds of videos talking about the game in a really basic way, yet there is one YouTuber that uploads actual technical information stuff once every few decades. Sadly, I'm not really doing anything different with this video, but making a DRG video has been an intrusive thought in my head for 3 years now, and it's better to get my opinions out there than to let it continue bother me. That being said, I think I made every point I wanted to make for a while with this video and disclosure. The script went from 18 pages to 14 pages to finally 8 pages of something hopefully comprehensible. And I have been working on the script far longer than I would like to admit, so, let me know what you think about the video. Discussions about the video or the game are always welcome in my comments. See you soon, folks. Have a nice one. Okay.